on the Ukrainian issue by our Western colleagues, the thought came to my mind that the reason for this meeting was the letter we received in early July from a group of Ukrainian political prisoners under the name of the chairman of the Security Council. I would like to remind you that it was signed by such well-known politicians, human rights activists, civil servants and deputies who are today prisoners of the Zelensky regime, as Elena Bereznaya, Vyacheslav Boguslav, Vitaly Gordin, Artem Dmitruk, Alexander Dubinsky, Oleg Kulinich, Yaroslav Oleshko, Alexander Oleynikov and Yuri Rabuka. You have all had the opportunity to read it and make sure that the number of political prisoners in Ukraine is thousands. The norms of the constitution and the laws are not being followed. People are being thrown into prison for, I quote, calling for peace and holding elections, opposing the war between Slavic peoples, religious and political beliefs, criticism of violent mobilization, and civil opposition. End of quote. Ukrainian political prisoners appeal to the Security Council of the UN calling for the abolition of, I quote, all illegal sanctions imposed since the beginning of the war against the citizens of Ukraine as unconstitutional and repressive measures of political persecution. End of quote. This is, in fact, not just a letter but a cry of the soul. We did not then draw the attention of the Council to this document in order not to give reason to our enemies to try to give it all up for Russian propaganda, as they always do in such cases. It is enough to recall the American citizen Goncalo Lira, who was tortured in January 2024 by the Security Service, whose human rights allegations were also written off by the Kiev regime as Russian propaganda. Since 2014, any criticism of the Ukrainian authorities of the administration itself and its sponsors is Russian propaganda. This is not a cunning logic, and it still works today. Violent mobilization, which was mentioned in the letter to the human rights activists, is also, according to the Kiev clique, the invention of the Kremlin. However, all Ukrainians know that the military commissars of Zelensky or TCC, as they are called in Ukraine, in the literal sense of the word, kidnap people in broad daylight on the streets, in shopping centers, in pharmacies, in sports clubs. At the same time, the toughest, sometimes inhuman methods are used. Hundreds, if not thousands of cases of death and crippling of the callers, which all Ukrainians talk about, are denied by the authorities. Numerous videos on social networks, where men are grabbed on the streets, beaten by families, brutally beaten and pushed into buses, often leaving their small children alone on the street, are cynically called by Ukrainian officials the productions of a mass film. If you believe the Ukrainian authorities, then Ukrainians are generally in the ranks of those who want to go to the front. Can you imagine what it is like for ordinary citizens to hear such a monstrous lie? Recently, however, this system of collective lie and vicious circle has failed. The workers of one of the TCC in Transcarpathia, during another raid, inflicted serious injuries to 45-year-old Joseph Shebestian, an ethnic Hungarian, a citizen of Ukraine and Hungary. As a result, he ended up in a hospital, where he died after a few weeks. And this despite the fact that Joseph Shebestian was initially recognized as not eligible for a health call. There are hundreds of such cases with Ukrainians. They have become the norm for the Zelensky concentration camp, as the Ukrainians themselves have long been calling their country. And only for our Western colleagues, this is a taboo topic. All European and American human rights activists who have been given the command to speak about Ukraine either well or not. And no one would have recognized the unfortunate Joseph Shebestian abroad. But he, to the dismay of Zelensky and his sponsors, turned out to be Hungarian. As a result, the Hungarian Foreign Ministry expressed a decisive protest in connection with the murder of its citizen and demanded official explanations. In response, the Ukrainian authorities said about the alleged attempt to escape from the country of the mobilized and that he died in the hospital for natural causes. Of course, the Ukrainian side, as in all such cases, despite the obvious facts, refused to bear any responsibility for the death of a man. This lie, of course, did not please Budapest, and the scandal continues to this day. Mr. Chairman, it is good that there is Hungary, with its principled position, which does not want, unlike the vast majority of other EU countries, to close its eyes to the dictatorship established in Ukraine. And who will stand up for other unfortunate, forcibly mobilized Ukrainians, whom the regime of the blown-up Kiev prince against their will throws into the meat grinder in the name of the Western geopolitical interests? Who, for example, will stand up for an elderly woman from the city of Mariif in the Kharkov region, who recently tried to prevent the employees of the military commissariat? Try to guess what was the answer of Zelensky's henchmen to this. Correctly, all this was qualified as Russian propaganda. The Ukrainians are already used to achieving justice and punishing those who violate all legal norms, including the constitution of the military commissariat. In their country, this is impossible. In those rare cases when criminal proceedings against the employees of the military commissariat in connection with the excess of their official powers are still being initiated, the State Bureau of Investigation, which conducts pre-trial investigations, simply does not find out the nature of the crime. What remains in these conditions for ordinary people who have long refused to go to war? Increasingly widespread hatred is received by the blockade of roads and settlements, in which the military commissariat simply do not let people in. It goes without saying that the Ukrainians fiercely hate the employees of the TCC, who are called by the people not otherwise than policemen, like the fascist punishers in the years of the occupation of Ukraine and in the Second World War. The hatred and despair of people have reached the point that they actively publish and send Russian military commissars coordinates to their citizens and are very happy when strikes are carried out on them. This is what the former comedian, who imagined himself a dictator of the entire Ukraine, Mr. Chairman, at the meeting today we expected that Western parents for Ukraine would finally say about the intensifying persecutions in the country on the faces of those who profess canonical orthodoxy. Moreover, on July 2nd, a decree was adopted by the President of Ukraine, the decisive representative of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Onufry, of Ukrainian citizenship, on the basis of some pseudo-proofs that he allegedly is a citizen of the Russian Federation. The clergyman, who denies the existence of citizenship, is also accused of, I quote, maintaining ties with the Moscow Patriarchate and deliberately contradicting the reception of the canonical independence of the Ukrainian Church from the Moscow Patriarchate, whose representatives openly support Russian aggression against Ukraine. End of quote. And this is happening in a country where the freedom of religion and separation of the church from the state are enshrined in the constitution. In general, the medieval Inquisition could have learned a lot from Zelensky's regime in terms of persecution of the common people and the hunt for witches. And our Western colleagues only shamefully look down when they are pointed out what the Ukrainian authorities are doing. Today, of course, about this outrageous situation. Today, our Western colleagues have also been silent about one more direction of this very hunt for witches, which the Kiev prince has been involved in recent days. So, having learned that, regardless of the president, the anti-corruption structure and the criminal cases against him and his closest associates, he passed a law on the subordination of these structures to him by the General Prosecutor's Office. Now, at this very moment, his henchmen are busy destroying documents embezzling corruption of the highest echelons of power, extorting the Kiev usurper and his associates at the expense of billions of dollars in budget funds and Western aid. Having received the documents with the exposing evidence, they have formally played back supposedly in response to the negative reaction in Ukrainian society and abroad. It is remarkable that the structures that were created under the pressure of the West and positioned almost as an antidote to corruption, hence the criticism that is heard from the European capitals today. Only today we did not hear it here. I can't help but mention the recent defamation of the Lviv Memorial Complex of the Slava Hill, which cannot be seen otherwise as an insult to the memory of the countless victims of fascism and those who fell in the fight against Nazism for the immortal feat of the citizens of the Soviet Union. In favor of their conjunctural interests, the Ukrainian authorities mercilessly exhumed the remains of 355 Soviet soldiers, including heroes of the Soviet Union, who died in the battles for the liberation of Lviv from the German fascist troops. None of the Western representatives, equally in the Secretariat of the World Organization, did not find the courage to condemn these shameful misdeeds of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Despite the fact that the resolution adopted annually by the General Assembly of the UN on the fight against the heroization of Nazism, neo-Nazism and other types of practice that promote the escalation of modern forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia and intolerance associated with them accentuate the unacceptable destruction of monuments and memorials erected in memory of the feats of those who fought against Nazism during the Second World War, as well as the illegal exhumation and transfer of their remains. So why was today's meeting convened if not to discuss the stories I have mentioned? As it turns out, again, only in order to artificially support the Ukrainian issue in the Security Council, especially against the background of the ongoing massacre and humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, about which our Western colleagues are much less eloquent. At the same time, to criticize Russia for methodically and consistently destroying military infrastructure and objects associated with its potential, blocking warehouses with supplied Western ammunition and equipment, striking the places of gatherings of Ukrainian military, foreign instructors and mercenaries, In a word, it does everything it has to do under the conditions imposed on it by NATO countries by war. Does this ritualistic propaganda of our Western colleagues deserve a call for a meeting of the Council? Do not waste your and our time, ladies and gentlemen. We destroyed, destroy, and will destroy the military infrastructure of the Kiev regime as part of the demilitarization of this country, which is one of the goals of our special military operation. We do not hit civilian objects that suffer exclusively from the actions of the Ukrainian Air Force located in residential areas of cities in violation of the norms of international humanitarian law. Ordinary Ukrainians, who are afraid not of Russian strikes, but of the actions of their soldiers, they know that we are not fighting with them, but with the Kiev regime, which brought its country together with all Ukrainians as a victim of the Western anti-Russian project. The more of your military supplies to the Kiev regime, the more of our strikes. This is not our choice. We have long and consistently proposed to solve the Ukrainian crisis through diplomacy, but you are not satisfied with this while you are ready to fight with Russia and on with the hands of the Ukrainians. And the fact that there are becoming fewer and fewer of them does not worry you at all. Therefore, you persistently try not to notice how the corrupt regime in Kiev is trying to save the skin of Zelensky and his clique, putting the future of your country at stake. We will talk about this in detail at a separate meeting invited by us on July 31st, where we propose to concentrate on discussing actions that undermine the search for diplomatic solutions to the Ukrainian conflict, including an attempt to disrupt the direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiating track in Istanbul. Thank you for your attention.